We started by saying you always start prepping the ending first, right? So you start by prepping your payoff because you need to know where you're going. So once you have your payoff, then you need to move to the beginning. But with regards to your payoff, remember that element of surprise. And then you prep your hook, which is the most important part, because if you don't have a great hook, no one's going to hear the rest of your story. Then you focus on the middle part. Okay, so then you focus on your crumbs and everything else. What else did we say? Put yourself last. Remember, your story is not about you, it's about the subject, or if there's an interviewee, it'll be about them, etc. Don't be typical. So only what you want to say about a subject. Don't say something anyone else will say, otherwise it's seen as generic. Use real language, okay? Don't announce anything, simply talk to me. Page 193 to 206, that's where we are at the moment. Then we said, don't read to me, okay? Unless you're quoting something, you can read a section, but talk to me, okay? Make quotes short. So we automatically tune out when people are reading because of that monotone voice that you are reading in. Then number 6, this is where we left off, find another camera angle. So what did we say? If there's anything that's happening, there are always more angles. There's not just you and me and the actual whatever happened. There are also a couple of outsiders who will be able to give you a viewpoint. Let's start looking at how this camera angle thing works. So when you're writing a story and telling a story, use different vantage points. Every different vantage point will give you a completely different view of the same event. Like I said, there are books being written from multiple people's point of views. Same story, exact same storyline, but it's interesting because it's different vantage points, okay? The better and the more adept you become at seeing these different camera angles, the more interesting and engaging you will be. And this comes again with time. It's something that you'll learn to do the more you practice. In your textbook, they speak about what about the person that is, on the float, thinking I've been waving to the crowd and smiling for 2 miles. My face muscles are screaming and man, my arms are tired, but I've still got 8 more miles to go. Or the marching band might say something like, what's she griping about? All she has to do is sit there and wave. I have to walk 8 more miles and lug this tuba, okay? So that's where it comes in. Everyone is thinking differently. There's at least one major way in which storytelling to a radio or TV or podcast or internet audience differs from the kind of storytelling you might do around the dinner table. When you're sitting around a dinner table, it's considered very rude to leave if you are bored. I don't know about you, but I grew up that way. It doesn't matter whether I didn't want to be there anymore for the grown-ups conversations. I had to sit until they told me I'm allowed to get up to leave, okay? But on the radio, it's a completely different situation. So if you have not given your audience a reason to stay here, they won't feel obligated to listen too long because there's no reason for them to, okay? So they will stop listening. So it's important to put a few essential things up front. If you are telling a story outside of breaking news, it's necessary to immediately engage and captivate your listener. How do you do that? You hook them in the first 7 to 14 seconds, once again. As with anything you put on air, ask why someone will listen to this. Why is it that you will listen to a story that I'm telling right now? What are you getting out of it? Give the reason someone should listen to your story before you do anything else. So your first 7 to 14 seconds, you want to do all of this, okay? You want to tell them why they should be listening. So the trick is to get your audience to want to hear the rest of the story and feel that they need to know how it will end. So how do you do that? You start working on the fact that everyone is curious, okay? Everyone has curiosity, so you work on their curiosity factor. As with anything you put on air, ask why they should listen to this, like I've said, and give the reason. Then this is an example. If you've ever wondered whether you're really alone in the dressing room when you try on clothing, you want to know about the security guard who's going to jail today. Okay, that's a great example of a hook. So how do you find this reason? before anything goes to air. You take it apart and you look at the facts and try to see it from all the different angles. Who are the players involved? How can you make your listeners care about them? What factors are you bringing in, incorporating to make them care? Who will be affected by the outcome of what you want to say, okay, or what you have to say? You need to answer at least one of these questions and put it right up front. Now we get to what we call the PRISM method. Similar to the camera angle, one of the techniques to help people improve storytelling is this PRISM method. When you have a crystal in your hand and the light falls on it and you change the direction of the crystal, have you seen that the colors change along with you changing your hand, for instance? So while it stays the exact same crystal, it's still that one crystal, right? You're not swapping it out for different things the whole time. You're utilizing the same one. It's still the same light that's falling off it. It's still the same wall that you are bouncing this light off. But when you move the prism, you change your perspective on the light and you see it from a completely different angle. You see a completely different pattern, even though nothing else is changing. So what is this? This is like all of us sitting in the same scenario, thinking about things differently. So thinking of yourself as the prism through which the facts of your story will pass is a good way to imagine the many ways that you can approach and tell many sides of a story. Okay, there isn't a right or a wrong way to tell a story, but you can use this PRISM method to find the best way to tell it. Okay, I want us to look at page 198 of your textbook, Beyond Powerful Radio. There's a very nice example of a PRISM method story. Okay, so I'm going to read it to you now. Maggie, a reporter, waits at a shop to make a purchase. As she continues to stand there, Rachel, the owner of the store, is busy talking on the phone, making arrangement to close early tonight. Why? It turns out Rachel has to close at 3 p.m. because she's got to get to the airport on time to pick up her twin brother, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter. As the conversation continues, the story unfolds through eavesdropping that the siblings have not seen each other for 47 years. They were twins born in India, then were separated after their parents divorced. The mother brought the baby girl to England, and the father took the boy to America. They hadn't seen each other since, and neither knew what happened to the other. One day, the woman's teenage daughter asked about her uncle and was curious about her grandfather. She went online and conducted an internet search. In less than 4 days, she'd located her mother's twin brother living in the United States. Tonight was their big reunion at the airport. Maggie was a reporter, and this was a story. So she said, "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing." When Maggie asked if she can come along for the reunion, the woman agreed, and that's when Maggie learned the rest of their saga. It turned out the brother had had a terrible life growing up in America. Their father, now deceased, had been an alcoholic and had never kept a job for more than a few months at a time. He'd had 4 marriages. There were times when the boy was forced to live on the road with his dad, sleeping in their car. He'd gone hungry and never finished a single school year in the same town. Since the young man had had such an unstable upbringing, though he had steady employment, he chose not to marry until he was in his mid-40s. And he'd had his first child at 47. So tonight at the airport, the brother, his wife, and the small daughter were meeting his twin sister and her family for the first time. So, like we said, there's no right or wrong way to tell a story, but you can find the best angle to tell this specific story. So Maggie examined all angles of the story to find the most powerful approach for a feature. So let's look at the couple of different approaches that you can take, thinking in this case that we're looking at it like Maggie would look at it. So number 1 there, we are a global village. With the internet, no matter how long someone's been missing, if you have the time and the patience to look, with a bit of information and a little luck, or maybe a small miracle, you can find nearly anyone. So the first angle is how, after all these years, via the internet, they found each other again. Okay, so the global village side of it. Second one, studies show that twins often feel incomplete if separated. even if it happened when they were infants. Do you ever wonder whether twins feel like two halves of one whole? If you're a twin, do you ever feel that you are missing your other half if you've been separated? So then there's the angle of the twins, right? Like that's also a completely different way of looking at it. Then the third one, if you've never had a good parenting model, should you think twice about becoming a parent yourself? It's hard enough to be a good partner in a relationship, but if you've never seen love modeled or watched a healthy relationship, how can you be equipped or prepared to be a good husband or wife or partner in a relationship? Again, completely different angle that could have been taken, right? So from the angle of the brother who's never seen like how it is to have a stable relationship. So all of these would be acceptable angles with which you can approach the story, and they all would have worked. It's all different stories at the end of the day. So Maggie was trying to decide which one she would use as she traveled to the airport with Rachel and her daughter. But when she saw the scene unfolding before her, Maggie knew her entire point would be the little girl. So she ended up telling the story from the little girl's perspective. So here is the opening of her story as it aired. 2-year-old Liza, with her dazzling smile, big blue eyes and blonde curls, is sitting on her aunt Rachel's lap. Liza is exactly the same age her father and her aunt were when they were separated in India 47 years ago. So that's how she ended up starting this conversation and this story. So this example shows us how by examining the same story from all potential angles and approaches, you can find the best and the most compelling way to tell this story, okay? That's why the PRISM method is so important to look at, because we had one angle now that we were focusing on, right? So the dad and the dad's career or his just whole life. And we just got another 3 different ones, and then we saw the angle that she actually ended up taking. So the PRISM method is extremely important. So by using this PRISM method, you are well on your way to become a more powerful storyteller at the end of the day. So that's what we want. So where do stories come from? If you've gone through a scenario, you have a story to tell, right? Because you can tell it from your vantage point. So you can narrate this specific story. It's a popular belief that everyone has at least one good story to tell. Unfortunately, having a good story solves only one part of this challenge. That's why storytelling is such a discrete skill, okay? There are 3 basics of creating powerful radio principles that will apply here. And these are: tell the truth, make it matter, and never be boring. So why are we saying tell the truth? Why does it matter? Why can't I simply make up a lie?
I think because when you lie, your story, not that it already doesn't sound believable, but you won't go in like a chronological order of events. You'll like jump from here and here, and it will just be like a tangent instead of when you're telling the truth, you know the beginning, middle, and like the end. And yeah.
Also, the problem is if you need to retell that story now, it's very easy to get caught out in a lie. And as soon as that's happened, you are no longer seen as credible. Make it matter. So how do you do that? How do you make it matter? You need to get someone to buy into your story. You need to get someone to care about your story or about the characters within your story, okay? So how do you do that? You make them vulnerable. You talk about their emotions, okay? So you give that emotive language across. You need to learn how to be visual when speaking and emotionally engage your listener. Stay away from things like me or we or I and talk about you. So your experience, how are you seeing this thing? How are you feeling about how the story is unfolding? Never be boring, obviously. These are skills that you can learn. It takes time, but once you've learned them, storytelling does get a lot easier. Okay, you'll see just by practicing these things over and over, eventually you'll start naturally getting into them easier. So like I said, if you can learn to speak visually, emotionally engage with your listener, and use the word you instead of me or we or I, instantly you're a more powerful storyteller. So stories can come from anywhere. I'm sure you had things happen over the weekend, right? Stories that you can tell us about things that you've experienced, how you felt about things, because we all go through certain emotions on a day-to-day level. We're not all just happy chappy 24/7, right? Because we're people, we're human beings, and there are obstacles and things that come into our life that we need to try and figure out or work through. So if we sat down and had to each tell a story, I'm sure we all will have a story that would be interesting to tell. The biggest source of stories is you. That's what it comes down to. You are the biggest source of stories. Some of the best stories or content for your material come from the real lives of people you know, or experiences you've had or heard about or observed. Let's look at Jeffrey Hedquist once again. He's 10 questions for storytellers. Number 1, who's the story about? So personalize the story. The most compelling stories aren't about a company or a station or an institution. They're about a person. Somewhere there's one person that this story is about. Okay, so the overall protagonist of your story, and there's normally an antagonist in some way. Remember, you need to paint a picture for me. What is the situation? Like, are we in limbo or where are we? Explain the scenario where this thing starts. Your audience wants to know. We want to know everything about the story. So once you tell them, they could follow the story more easily because you set the scene for your audience. So now I can close my eyes and I can envision exactly where we are and how this thing is unfolding. Then what is your goal? Once again, this is your payoff. So what do you want your protagonist to accomplish at the end of the day? Or what does your protagonist need to accomplish? What do they want to change? What are their dreams? Make the goal clear to your audience. Give them a reason to care about its attainment, okay? People need to buy into this protagonist and have a reason to root for this guy or whatever, for this person, to stand behind this person. Then what is your obstacle? Because remember, every great story has conflict and has obstacles. It doesn't always have to start out with an obstacle, but the journey towards the goal need to be one from things like safety to danger, or the known to the unknown. The obstacle is the challenge. It's the problem, it's the dilemma or the question. This conflict makes the story worth telling, gives it drama, or makes the comedy work. Saying that there's conflict, this does not mean it has to happen like physically. It could happen in your head, okay? This whole story could play off in your head as well. You could have these obstacles in your head as you're thinking this situation through, etc. So there are different ways that this can happen. And then what's the process to overcome this obstacle? Your audience learns the most from how the protagonist overcomes the obstacle. It's the method that teaches the lesson. So what memories did they encounter? Did the encounter trigger for them? Did it trigger anything for them? What inner demons did the protagonist face? Think little steps. Then are you showing instead of telling? Use your active voice, right? Don't use the passive voice. So tell me something as it happens. Don't tell me that this thing is happening by or via XYZ, okay? So don't talk passively, talk actively, even though we tend to write passively, okay? Let your audience reach their own conclusions. Don't tell them how to feel. Never, ever tell someone how to feel. That's like me going, but you should be happy right now. What's the natural reaction? Who are you to tell me how I should be feeling right now? Okay, so don't tell someone how they should be feeling. Give your audience the gift of discovery along the way. They should be able to discover certain things, same as your protagonist might be discovering things along the way of the story. Are you keeping it interesting? Your story should want to intrigue and engage the audience from the beginning and surprise them along the way to keep their attention. So at no point should they feel, oh, I'm so bored right now. I'm so tired right now. Like, just going to stop listening. What's the emotional connection? Is there one? You want your audience to care, to feel something for your story. If we laugh or cry or get angry or get sad, become frightened or shocked, get inspired or energized, we will remember the story and the message you want to convey longer. It's not about who you are. It's about how you made me feel in that scenario. Again, think back to a time when someone complimented you just randomly. We remember those things, okay? We don't remember who you were, but we remember how you made us feel within that moment. The same if some random stranger angers me. Like I had a situation personally like that a couple of years ago where a guy really, really, really annoyed and angered me. And to this day, I have no idea who that guy is. But he really angered me so much that that specific scenario still comes up in my head. I still remember how I felt in that moment. Okay, so that's what you want. What is the point? Is there an aha moment that allows your audience to discover a kernel of truth? At the conclusion, will your audience understand what the story is about? Will they have gained an insight? Okay, what are they gaining out of listening to your whole story? Is there a clear call to action? What should the listener do to get the benefits you've just sold a story about? What could the listener do to apply the insights to his or her own life? Okay. Storytelling does not require great windows of time. This is where ads come in. Commercials are some of the shortest forms of storytelling. So I told you this last week when I asked you how long a story should be. A story could be 30 seconds because an ad on average is 30 seconds. So commercials are the shortest forms of storytelling. Not all of them are told well, obviously, okay? But the ones who are the ones that we remember. You can probably recall at least one 60-second spot that takes you 2 minutes to describe. Why is that? Why does it take you so much longer to describe to me when you've heard this great ad that was 30 seconds long? Why does it take you so much longer? It's because writing short is almost always harder than it is to write long. It's way more difficult to write a story in 30 seconds than it is to write a story that's 10 minutes long, for instance. Okay. Why is that? Because you have to write this thing, you have to write it out, and then you go back to it, and then you have to rewrite it, and then you need to check for where there are perhaps 5 words that you can cut down to 1. That means that has a synonym in 1 word, and you must still try to keep this thing descriptive while still keeping the flow of the story throughout to make sure that you don't lose people within this thing. Okay, so it really isn't that easy. If you can take someone on a complete journey in 30 to 60 seconds of airtime, you are truly an adept storyteller and copywriter, okay? Jeffrey Hedquist suggests you examine every part of your station for places where storytelling could make a real difference. In how many areas are you using stories? Of course, these techniques apply in all obvious places where you need content, but there's a need for good storytelling everywhere, not simply where you need this good content, okay? Think about it. Beyond your newscast, your morning shows, your public service programming and commercials, there's a need for good storytelling everywhere. So sales proposals and your station's website. A website should tell stories, okay? It should tell all your stories because that's your owned media. That's where people go to get more about you. It's your podcast, promotional materials, even your engineering department's training manuals. Even training needs to be done in a storytelling way. Think about your most boring subject, and you better not think it's radio, but think about your most boring subject. There's probably almost no storytelling happening within that, which is why you find it so extremely boring. So there are reasons why we need to start working in storytelling into so much more than simply what we're thinking about, so simply our on-air content. You'll be surprised how well your staff learns emergency procedures once they've heard a story of what happened when the last chief engineer forgot to fuel up the backup generator. So if you tell them something that definitely academic literacy. Yeah, I feel like academic lit should be kind of a boring subject. I don't know how many stories you can tell about that. Because communication is really storytelling, you will find more information about how to tell powerful stories for a variety of platforms and purposes throughout everything that we're going to be looking at still in this semester, okay? Because that's what it comes down to. Communication is storytelling. So it's about how well you can communicate at the end of the day. So something, just let you in. So definitely something to focus on, okay? Summary. Storytelling is one of the key points in the proven creating a powerful radio or powerful communicators process. So focus, engage, opinion, opposition, and storytelling. Storytelling is used to entice the listener. It's been taught since childhood. There are no boring stories, only boring storytellers. The basics of storytelling are covered in the new section of this book, which we're going to start looking at pretty soon, which is the who, what, where, when, why, and how, plus the beginning, the middle, and the end. However, the way the story is told with personality and tailoring it to the audience is the key to being a powerful storyteller. Stories reflect the basic themes of human nature. So good and evil, right and wrong, humor, love, life's absurdities, triumph against all odds, rags to riches or riches to rags. And stories that succeed are about character and inspire, give hope, teach, and move the members of the audience. So we can use these techniques anywhere as long as we're telling a story. Yes. Okay, it's about telling a story. People learn a lot easier when we give them an actual scenario versus if I simply give you the basics about it and explain it to you from an academic point of view, how you should be perceiving it, okay? Stories work better. Now we're switching to next level radio, 160 to 164, okay? So becoming a powerful storyteller. Said previously, we're all born to listen to stories. We all love a great story. We're drawn instinctively to these great storytellers, and radio presenter has two things going for them. They have an easy to understand, relatable, and emotive character map or profile, and they're great storytellers. So once again, the elements of good storytelling: the hook, the crumbs, the payoff, and the blackout. Under the crumbs, we have the dress up. We admire a character for trying more than for their success, right? Or do you feel different there? The person who fails, but fails forward. So they fail and they get up, they try again, they carry on, they don't let it bring them down. Instead of knowing that you're good at something, so continuing with it. Okay, I'm glad to see someone agrees there with me. So we admire a character for trying more than for their successes. So Emma Coates is a storyboard artist for Pixar, and she's really good at what she does. So this is what she said. From a radio perspective, this can be seen as follows. Make your stories have characters that are trying to succeed. Presenters, so you must make yourself as vulnerable as possible in front of your audience. So here, this is where one of those articles that you had to read for your assignment last semester will come in very handy for the future. It's because it was about vulnerability, okay? Learning how to be vulnerable. Make listeners believe presenters are just like them. So you need to make people believe you're like them and that you are also striving for the same successes and trying to avoid the same failures that they are. There are 6 ways in which you can make yourself more vulnerable. How is it that the first one says listening is the most important part of becoming vulnerable? How does listening make you vulnerable? So listening is the most important part of becoming vulnerable, because when you listen to someone, you can take in all of the details and you can find ways of exactly that. where there's relatability, relevance and relatability within the story and within the character. Then while you are on air, if something fits into your character profile and you're thinking it, then say it, okay? Even if you weren't prepped to say something specifically. For you to understand this, you need to have done your character profile, so your character breakdown from your Next Level Radio textbook. So this fits in with who you are as the character on air, and then if something happens, then you, that you're thinking that fits in with that character, you can say it. Then number 3, be intimate, be personal. Find ways to share personal experiences with your listeners. Okay, personal experiences, not private. Part of your vulnerability here, because you are opening up about yourself. Share your emotions, not just your thoughts. Tell your listeners how you're feeling about a topic, not only what you're thinking about it. That's a very big one, is getting into how it is that you are feeling about it. That's how we tend to connect the most with people. We connect in those moments where we are raw, where we are talking with someone else about the feelings that we are facing in the specific scenario. We're not cut off, right, from each other. So vulnerability, obviously, and self-deprecation, okay? Place the focus on your listeners. Ask them to share their experiences by sharing in your experience. How do you do that? Have you ever been in a situation where, or when last did you experience this? Or remember that time when? If we go back to that story or that ad that I read you, have you ever been in a situation or in a relationship that felt so good, but yet so bad? Okay, it's those kinds of questions where you are placing yourself in my shoes, in essence. You have to keep in mind what is interesting to you as a person, okay? Not what is fun to do as a writer. So you are coming up with content here for your audience, not simply writing stuff that is nice and fun for you to write. These two things can be completely different. Because it could be easy for you to write a story where there are coincidences that, let's say, for instance, you are in the middle of the desert. Your character is in the middle of the desert. They're stranded. They were left here by the mafia to die. And along comes a camel. Yay, now I'm saved. I can get on this camel and drive to the nearest town. That is easy writing. But that's boring to your listener, because I mean, how big are the chances that a camel is randomly going to find you in the middle of the desert to like save you? Not so, the chances are quite small actually. So that's the kind of stuff to keep in mind here. Always put the listener front and center of every radio conversation. It's always about your listener, okay? Remember that flow and interaction that we went through. Make sure that content is relevant, that it's reliable. Trying for theme is important, but you won't see what the story is actually about until you're at the end of it, right? Now rewrite it. This is something that I want you to take in now, please. A lot of people get stuck on delivering only their first idea. So you will write the story, you will record that story, and you'll think, great, shut, I'm done. Not so much, okay? You're supposed to then, after you've written a story, you're supposed to go back, read that thing again, see the different angles to this thing, try and see it from your audience's perspective, and then rewrite it. Look at it again. Rewrite it again if need be, until you are happy with the story. Then you record it. And then guess what? You record it again, and you record it again until you are happy with the end product. You're not supposed to simply, when you're on air, go on air, tell the story, done. That's a mistake that a lot of people make, is thinking once they've written a story once, it's 100%, it's great, it's right, they don't need to change anything, so they don't go back to it. Okay, you need to go back to the story. A template is something along the lines of, once upon a time, there was X. Every day, Y. Because of that, Z. Because of that, something happens again until finally A. Okay, so what happens here? There's a scenario, and then within that scenario, every day something happens, which then leads to an obstacle, which then leads to something else, another obstacle or another conflict. until finally, then it's resolved. Okay? So this is a great template for you to use when you're writing a radio story, especially when it comes to personal stories that relate to a presenter's character on air. So it's that thing that there was the scenario, then there might have been a conflict scenario, or this might have been an obstacle and then conflict and then another obstacle, and then it was resolved at the end, right? Number 5 there, simplify, focus, combine characters, hop over detours, okay? If you, you'll feel like you are losing valuable stuff, but it sets you free. So don't always try to put in every single little detail that you want to, because you might be taking way too many detours for your listener. Keep your story simple, concise, and engaging. It's like I said, imagine the straight road. You want to veer off the road, fine, but you want to come back to the straight road. Then you might veer off again, but then you'll come back to the straight road. You're not veering off and then taking a right and then a left and then a right and like going around, I don't know, some circle, landing up in a completely different highway, because then you completely lost everyone, including yourself once again. So keep it simple, concise, but engaging. Okay. Number 6 there. What is your character good at or comfortable with? Then throw the total opposite to them. Okay. Throw them the polar opposite. Challenge them. How do they deal? Think about yourself. Like when you're in an easy situation, wonderful. How do I now take you out of that situation and I put you in the polar opposite, something that takes you completely out of your comfort zone? How do you deal with that? And I write that story, because that will be way more exciting and entertaining than keeping you where you're comfortable, okay? Every character in a story needs to be challenged. A story needs conflict or dilemma. That's the stuff that makes us want to listen to it in the first place. It's conflict. Conflict is one of those spices that we love seeing, okay, and listening to. So conflicts and dilemmas need to be in stories for them to work. Again, come up with your ending before you figure out your beginning and your middle. So you start with your payoff. Starting with the ending will shape the entire story. Number 8, finish your story. Let it go, even if it's not perfect. Once again, though, this is not the first time you've written the story. You've written it a few times already at this point. But what you need to keep in mind is, once you've gone through it a couple of times, if you're still not 100% happy with it and you can't figure out what it is that you need to change, let it go. Okay? You're continuously supposed to be creating content. Literally, this is what you should be focusing on continually. So don't get stuck on a piece that wasn't perfect. You will get better the more you write and the more you tell stories. As with everything in life, you get better with practice. Okay. So when you're stuck, make a list of things that would not happen next. A lot of times, the material that you need to get you unstuck will then kind of appear in front of you. So when you're stuck in this writer's block thing, write a list of everything that can't happen next, because that'll help to lead you to what can happen next. So this really is a fantastic way of brainstorming the crumbs or the middle pieces of a story. So that should make sense to you. Then number 10, pull apart stories that you like, anything you like. There's a reason you like certain stories, certain genres. There's a reason certain stories annoy you, or that certain stories are just stories you absolutely can't watch. Okay? If you break them down, pull these stories apart, figure out what it is in both scenarios that triggers you. What is it about the stories you like that you like? Is it the fact that it's got happy endings? Is it the fact that conflict is resolved? Whatever it might be. What is it that you don't like about them? Is it the fact that there's blood? So maybe you don't like gory stuff because you're sensitive that way? Or is it the fact that there's a lot of conflict? Maybe you don't like conflict that much. I don't know, whatever it is. Break these stories apart, figure out what you like and dislike about them. Why? Because guess what? When you start writing stories, you're going to get stuck in writing stories the way that you like to write. You're not going to want to venture into those uncomfortable genres. Okay, so you need to know why it is that you feel a certain way about certain stories. Yes, because what you like in them is a part of you. Okay, you need to recognize it before you can use it. Then number 11, putting it on paper allows you to start fixing it. If it stays in your head, a perfect idea, you will never share it with anyone. So you must always put your thoughts on paper. Otherwise, you're going to have so many stories that just kind of floats away, never to be used, because you haven't put it on paper, and only then you can start fixing it to the extent that you can eventually use it as a story. Number 12, discount the first thing that comes into your mind, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. Get the obvious out of the way. Surprise yourself. Great stories come from hard work. Okay, so don't write the first thing you want to write. Don't take that first route you want to. Number 13, give your characters opinions. Passive or malleable characters might seem likable to you as you are writing, but it's poison to the audience. Why? Because they're boring. Strong opposing opinions are gold on radio. Presenters should use these in storytelling whenever they can. We like the people that challenge other people on air. Okay, because we like hearing other viewpoints. If someone is just agreeable and they agree to absolutely everything, that's boring. There's no story to tell about them. Okay, we need to bring in those opposing opinions. And number 14, why must you tell this story? What is the belief burning within you that your story feeds off of? That is the heart of it. Why this story? You should be able to answer that. If you as a presenter have no emotional connection to the story, neither will your listener. Okay? Make sure that it's told in a way that brings out that connection, that emotional connection. That's why I always ask you to bring it back to you. How are you related to this thing? Why are you writing the story? Is it about, what is your opinion on the story? Is it about something that you've overheard that you feel very strong about? Did something happen to someone you know that made you like really want to tell the story? What is the personal connection to you at the end of the day? Why are you telling this story? If you were a character in this situation, how would you feel? Make your audience want to care, to feel something for your story. Okay. Then number 16, what are the stakes? Give us a reason to root for your character. Okay, what happens if they're not going to succeed? Stack the odds against it. A very good example, think of Rocky, the movie. Everyone was rooting for this guy at the end because he was this loser, for lack of a better word, who just wasn't doing good. Everything was going up against this match at the end, and everyone was rooting for him to win, and voila, he won, and everyone was like ecstatically happy about it. Okay, so what are the stakes? Give us a reason to root for your character. Stack the odds against. If presenters can get listeners on their side and rooting for them, they are creating emotional bonds that cause listeners to always tune in. Because if I feel I have a bond with you, I will try my best to tune into you and to keep listening to you, and I'll be loyal to you. Okay. Number 17, no work is ever wasted. If it's not working, let it go and move on. It will come back around to be useful later. Okay, you might use it in a couple of months, perhaps even a year, but you haven't wasted that work. You will use it at some point. You might rewrite it first and then use it. Number 18, you have to know yourself. The difference between doing your best and fussing. Story is testing, not refining. Okay. You as a presenter need to understand yourself and your character and exactly what you stand for. This is really, really, really important. You have to know who you are. 19, coincidences to get characters into trouble are great. Coincidences to get them out are cheating. Okay, don't be lazy when it comes to creating your stories. So think about, again, the man in the middle of the desert who has a camel coming to walk towards him. That is a coincidence to get them out of trouble, and that's cheating. Okay, so think about these stories more in detail. Number 20, exercise. Take the building blocks of a movie that you dislike. How do you rearrange them into what you do like? This is also one of your questions on your assignment. So when you find something boring, how do you rearrange the building blocks in the story to make it into a story that you do like, that you do find interesting? Okay. Number 21, you got to identify with your situational characters. You can't just write cool. What would make you act that way? So the more authentic the story and the storyteller, the better the chance of succeeding. So you need to make sure that you identify with your situation or your characters, okay? You can't just write something and then think that that's fine. Because what did we say? We said write truthfully, meaning if you write a situation, you will identify to it if it's a truthful situation. Number 22, what is the essence of your story? The most economical telling of it. If you know that, you can build out from there. So it's about being able to also summarize the story, okay? The essence of your story. Every great radio story is usually clear and concise. Listeners should be able to repeat the story and the ideas in the story almost word for word. So it needs to be broken down into such a way that it can easily be retold. Everyone still with me and still awake?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Thank you. So, any questions about storytelling techniques? None. Okay, so let's quickly do a summary. So storytelling is one of the key points, again, like we've said, focus, engage, opinion, position, and storytelling. Again, storyteller used to entice the listener. It has been taught since childhood. They aren't boring stories, just boring storytellers. So basics of storytelling is who, what, where, when, why, and how, plus the beginning, the middle, and the end. Stories reflect the basic themes of human nature, so good and evil, right and wrong, humor, love, life's absurdities, triumph against all odds, rags to riches or riches to rags, and stories that succeed are about characters that inspire, that give hope and teach and move the members of the audience. Okay. So that's where we're going to end off for today, and we will continue tomorrow.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Bye, ma'am.
Bye-bye.
Bye.